Jack of Faces, this is part 3 of our occasional series. I think I'd like to just occasionally keep in touch with you, more frequent than occasional, I suspect. How have your last few days been, or week or so since we last spoke? Have you had an okay time, given that you said last time the energies are fairly heavy at the moment? Where are we at energetically on this planet, and for you personally?
Thanks for this. Again, happy to be here, talk to you. Yeah, I haven't changed my mind much. I would say still relatively heavy. Foreseeable future is quite, challenging. So, a lot of relaxation and grounding. Time off screen, I would advise.
Yes.
Right. Yeah.
What are you doing for that? I'm going into nature more and into the garden, starting to read more books. What's your way of getting yourself off screen?
When I say off screen, I don't even necessarily mean get off the computer, because I know a lot of people. We all know it's good, and a lot of people are saying, right, like health advocates and so on and so forth, holistic health experts, get off the computer, right? Like move away from the TV screen. But even if you are on the computer, like just shutting down the browser, is a big move. Shut it down, do something like productive, like that type of thing. I have to constantly remind myself to do that, to like understand that this is a tool and it can be used in many ways. I don't have to expose myself to the sort of like the happenings of the world, because, well, when you do, I feel like most people will discover what I have discovered. And this is, I believe, how it's going to be for the next 2 or so years. A lot of like wars, conflicts, economic recession, a lot of just like dark and slimy stuff, just like slowly like seeping out. It's like, like from a dying corpse type of thing. Because what we're seeing, at least on an energetic level right now, is whatever's been sort of like swept under the rug type of thing. It's slowly coming out, but it's also like resisting. And that quote, I forgot who said it, but it's such an amazing quote. um the old world is dying and the new world is struggling to be born. This is a time for monsters. I love that quote.
Wow. I don't know who did say that, but that's what it feels like. It's absolutely what it feels like. So, just getting back to that idea, when you're browsing, when you're constantly scrolling through the next story, you're actually just getting overwhelmed with the monsters, the monsters coming out of the slime.
Like I keep having this conversation, Liz, with people who I consider are sort of like, well educated and learned, like wizened people, right? But they always make that same mistake, and the same mistake is this: you always give yourself a little bit too much when you say like, oh, it doesn't affect me. And of course it affects you. Of course it. Then why are you scrolling if it doesn't affect you, right? Like why is there this incessant need for you to constantly update yourself with the newest, freshest, like hottest information about all of these terrible things that are occurring, right? Like of course it's affecting you, because you sort of like get into this groove of like having to know and being up to date with, like, and there's nothing wrong about this, because you want to stay informed. Of course it's a dangerous world, more or less. But let's not say that it doesn't affect us, because it does. It affects the strongest, the smartest of us. It creates this sort of it paints imagery, right? And then that imagery goes into your mind, and then it goes into your subconscious, and it's there, right? Like it might not have immediate effect on your like immediate mood, right? But it will have an effect down the line, because it paints a picture of the world, and it's not necessarily a good picture, at least like what we've seen like for the past few months now, with more conflict, more war, so on and so forth. um Starting, taking root, right? That's another conflict that now you have to give mental space to mentally deal with. So there's a lot of these like isolated, places where it's so incredibly difficult to take anything positive out of these events, right? and then we say, oh, it doesn't affect us. That it affects us on a collective level. Whenever a new war begins, well, at least that's how the collective mind works. um, the collective gets a tiny bit more nihilistic. It gets a tiny bit more negative, right? It gets a tiny bit more strained. It's information that's sort of like tried and tested, right? It's not like someone's opinion, right? Like reading someone's opinion is different from reading a cold hard fact. And when that cold hard fact is, people are bombing one another, well, you kind of inherently think, well, I guess the world is going to shit now, you know, and that increases your sort of like, um, yeah, that nihilistic feeling. So I would say not avoiding that, not running from the objective reality, but sometimes you just gotta shut it up, turn it off, do something productive. You know.
What are the things that you do, Jack? What are your ways of replenishing your soul?
Well, I expose myself to as many beautiful things as I can. And while beauty, well, two types of beauty exists, right? One is like the subjective kind and the objective kind, right? So let's say even if you look at a face, you could have some sort of like subjective experience with it, and some sort of subjective, you can be opinionated about it and you can see subjective beauty in it, but then there is the idea of, let's say, symmetry and balance and harmoniousness, right? Like, and that's more like objective beauty. So what I'll do is, I will listen to music that I love and brings like sort of like a goodness out of it, and then I'll look at beautiful, like I have whole folders of like, like just beautiful images, stuff like that I'll look at. I'll read a lot. So I have to balance the crappy stuff, right? That
Yes.
sort of like is like levitating within my psyche, with just as much sort of like beauty and the things that keep me gentle and inspire me. I think a lot of people don't do that, and you see that in their mannerisms, you see that in their vocabulary, you see that like it slips out in their attitudes, um, and that's because they're scared, they're afraid,
Yes.
right?
Do you see that in Georgia? Here in New Zealand, I see it all the time. If I go into the city, they're just people with big liver frown lines. You know those lines between the
Yeah,
brows here, and they're frowning
yeah.
all the time, and their mouths are going down, and their faces look really tense, and their bodies look slouched forward. They don't look happy. New Zealand used to be quite a sort of easygoing country, and it's really lost it since Jacinda Ardern. And I'm just going to promote here that we are shortly going to move into Jack's specialty is looking at faces and being able to study what faces tell us. So we teased this, didn't we, at the end of our last talk, part two? We
Yeah,
said
we
we're going to
did.
look at Jacinda Ardern and a few other faces. But do you notice that in Georgia? Because certainly here since COVID, the COVID-19 rort was rolled out here, and all the other pressures of the climate change rort and all of the government lying to us through and through, people are so tense and on edge in New Zealand. I've really noticed it. Do you notice it there?
I do. It's a global phenomena, and we're far more connected, I believe, than we think. At least in the sense of temperament and sort of like general attitudes towards life. Let's say we might live in sort of like different circumstances and places, but that's why it's called the collective experience, because it's the collective experience, right? Like, when something happens in a distant part of the world and you can still sort of like interface with the truth of it, it like a lot of people will say, oh, I don't care, it's happening because it's like, let's say if something happens in, I don't know, like Switzerland or something, right? Like I can say, well, I don't care because it happens in Switzerland, but just the fact of it happening, right? It occurred. It's not a nice thing, or it is a nice thing, right? It affects your general view of the world, right? So interesting statistics. I'm a big lover of statistics. Like interesting statistics is like when some sort of like, like global, event that happens that shakes up the world, like crime increases, right? That should tell you a lot about sort of like the human collective, right? Like when something is relatively isolated and sort of like massively negative, and it happens like in some other part of the world, well, the imagery of it is like, okay, lawlessness and looting and violence, da, da, da. Crime increases, right? If you look at the stats, yeah, we're more connected than we think we are, for sure.
So if we flip that around and said, let's collectively sit and meditate on it, not taking 2 years to birth this new world that so many of us long for, to meditate on the world that we would really love, where there is really a letting go of the human ego and all of the trouble that creates in the world, the betrayals and the cruelties and the selfishness, all of those things, but rather the opposite of that, where there is a lack of interest in that side for all of us. There is far more interest in us being good to one another and working together and building something beautiful and bypassing the politicians and the globalists and all that they're trying to do to denude the West in particular. If we meditated on this beautiful world together, really focused on it and got millions doing that, what would that do, do you think, to the collective? Would it speed up the change?
I think it wouldn't, and I'll try to explain why. There's a certain type of threat, in my opinion at least, that comes with utopian ideas. And when we talk about that level of collective upgrading, right, and what I would call self-therapy, right, it's a very utopian idea because we assume that sort of like the individuals that make up the collective, each of them are well educated and well informed and armed with the full context of whatever we're trying to do, firstly. And secondly, we need to assume, I guess, if that were to be a reality, we need to assume that they have the inner resource, the sort of like the mental willpower and the know-how to even create this sort of significant change, because I believe like that desire deep down exists anyway. People do want to live in nice environments by, as default, like by default. But whether they're able to achieve this or not, they're most likely not. So I think you can't have meaningful change like this without conflict, unfortunately, when it comes to humans. But if we don't learn to move past the conflict, we will quite literally just destroy ourselves. So resolution is also very difficult because when we have a class-based divide, that's in every country, nation, tribe, whatever, exists a class-based divide, and the gap is growing further and further. How do you convince the classes that hold all of the power to actually follow along in this movement of yours? Because I'll tell you something that, well, I usually don't say, but let's say you build your spaceship, like we say, you make your home a beautiful place, and then someone comes and trashes it. Okay, like they just come and they bury it under the dust. Now what has Jack of Faces taught you? Well, he's taught you to make your home a beautiful place. Someone came and destroyed your home, and suddenly you are a vengeful spirit, right? So we also have to understand that this is a slow and gradual process if we consider it a realistic process, and it's far more complex than just boom, let's push against the people we don't like. And we'll talk about that sentiment a little bit when we get to Ardern and her physiognomy. But to sort of like finish off that thought, I think it's very important that we make our inner world, we beautify our inner world as well, right? So you build your spaceship, you make your home a beautiful place because you need the environment that sort of like it inspires beauty within. It's sort of like reverse engineering that. And once you have your beauty within, then okay, like I can put you on the front lines of a battle or push you into a well, and you'll find your little piece of heaven there too. That's the goal. Not that, look, we've built a beautiful world, let's put everyone into this utopian society, and yeah, just as soon as something goes wrong, we're back to hell again. I shared this. I shared this novella, I guess it's called, with on Twitter with my followers, and resonated very deeply with them. I really advise people read that. It's from Ursula Le Guin, who's a wonderful writer, sort of like old school. It's just a few pages, and read through it. I think it'll affect you in meaningful ways. It's called Those Who Walk Away from Omelas, right? And that describes very well, if you want to know the current state of the world, that's it. And not to like sort of like spoil it, but read it regardless, right, of you having the spoiler, because there's sort of like prosaic and poetic value to it. But it describes this society in that sort of like isn't shaped by any particular culture or like historical time or era. It just describes a society that would be very utopian and very happy, right? Where the streets are full of joy and music, and sort of like these grandiose structures, and sort of like these fields of flowers, and sort of like children dancing and singing, and da da da. And then it takes a very twisted turn, and yeah, I think people should read it, to get an understanding of what kind of society we live in today, and what is either the willing or unwilling sacrifice that we are making, to keep it up and running. And then, faced with that reality, then we can decide what we're going to do, and what we even can do.
There are so many ways that wonderful reply can, so many directions we could take that. What was the title? Did you say Omelas? Those who walk
Yes.
away from, what's Omelas? Omelas, is it the name
So
of the
Omelas
town?
is this fictional is it's the name of this fictional city that's
Wow.
celebrating the summer solstice, and it's basically like the first few paragraphs are relatively confusing when you read it, because it's like basically describing, how like a story needs to begin with, like, well, everything's just, something went wrong, or there's this call to action, or there's no main character, nothing like that. It's just the description of this city that is thriving, right? And then it takes a twisted turn. Well, okay, I'll spoil it. Where um, the author basically tells us, the narrating voice basically tells us, but in this beautiful, wonderful city, there is this small, musty, dingy shack, right? Where where this child is being held, right? The child symbolic of some sort of innocence, right? Some sort of a life, right? And this child is held in these terrible conditions. It's nasty, it's dirty, and it barely gets fed. It's in this absolutely terrible, terrible, horrid state. Um, and then she begins to describe how everyone sort of like knows that they're there, and the child has always been there, and they don't remember a time when the child wasn't there, and they all sort of like innately deep down know that this is the price they pay for the city of Omelas to well, function and work like it works. So it's a beautiful place. This is the price they pay, and at some point their ancestors paid this great price, and they keep paying, like, in a generational sense, they keep paying this price. And the child can't talk. It's basically, it only mumbles and it fumbles around, and sometimes it'll say that it'll be good, just like, feed me, like, let me out. It's a very dark picture. And then the people outside and their thoughts their thoughts are like, well, like even if we help this child, it's gone so far. Its psyche has devolved and regressed into such animalistic behaviors that would it even know that it's being treated well or unwell? Would it even know? Would it even be able to understand that it is experiencing love or care or empathy, right? So that's how they sort of justify it, that it's like, well, it's so far gone, this poor child, that it wouldn't even know. So why not just keep it there and have our beautiful, wonderful, glorious utopian society up and running all the time? And well, the twist of that story, everyone should read it, because I'm doing a terrible job, by the way, like recounting it, but still has such great effect. That's why the manuscript is called "The Ones Who Walk Away from Omelas," because there are a few people who will see this after a certain age. They're exposed to this truth, and they choose to walk away. And the author like very clearly states, we don't know where they go. They don't know where they go. They just know that they don't want to be here. They don't want to be part of whatever circus this is, right? Um, and the idea there is very human. The idea there is very intrinsic to who we truly are, where right now we live in this sort of like pyramidal capitalist communist type of societies where the suffering of the individual basically means nothing. So the suffering of what we would call an interface with as a human version of divine consciousness means nothing. And there are people, most of them, who are fine with this. Well, they'll come up with some sort of excuse. You know how mental gymnastics work. Well, someone has to suffer. Well, it's always been this way. Da, da, da. You have sort of like those council of elder types, right? That are going to come in and they're prepared, and they're like, they have all the ammunition they need to sort of like on a logical basis just destroy the argument of the 17-year-old or the 18-year-old is telling them this is wrong. Why are we torturing someone for like generations, right? And they always have some sort of answer, right? A logic beats out these sort of like naive innocence emotions. But the truth is, our children are wiser than these council of elder types. They're far
Yes.
wiser, and they understand. They intuitively and innately understand this is wrong. We need to find some other way. And I don't care if I have to walk into the desert, right, outside of your quote unquote utopian society. I prefer to walk into the desert, right? Have some sort of faith that I can find brighter shores rather than take part in this terrible society you've built.
I think you did a superb job with that explanation, and there are so many layers of that can be extrapolated and put on top of, for example, our society the way it is at the moment. With all the lying of the legacy media and the lying of the politicians, the manipulations, and we all know that's wrong. And then these alternate groupings have sprung up, supposedly under, say, a freedom banner. But we also see some of those groups, they lie and they silence the voice of truth, or they're driven by ego, and yet there are lots of people still willing to look away. They've left that initial layer of politics and legacy media and what was offered, say, in COVID-19. They've built up this alternate option that still has the same degradations and corruptions of the first lot, and it just. I know that when I talk to somebody and I feel, there's that bullshit monitor, it's just, there's bullshit coming out of this person. They're not telling the truth, or they're looking away. I feel such repulsion now. And I can really relate to that feeling of, I just want to get away and move on to find more of my people. The people that include someone like you, because I find when I ask you a question, what comes back at me is such directness, such brave honesty, such raw truth, that I feel that is the only thing left now for me to gauge if someone's trustworthy. I don't want flattery, and I don't want mealy-mouthed words. I want really honest truth that is able to get us to where we want to go. Truth is the foundation stone of where we want to be, I think. But there's so little of it around at the moment. And I think it's because the world is feeling a scary place to a lot of people. And so they're afraid. They're afraid to be that brave. And you're not.
Well, I don't even see myself as brave. Of course, like it's very humbling to hear those things, but the truth is, the one who is going to be brave is going to, put themselves on the political arena and say things like this. And I realized like this is such a strange world to live in because everything is like a rehashing of the old.
Yes.
With in the past, at least, it had some sort of like variety. Right now, it's just like the renaissance of the tasteless, or like someone who is. And I talk about the archetypal king a lot, right? I think about that a lot, and the archetypal king to me is a person is who represents all of the knightly and moral virtues and spiritual values that a true masculine force, like some sort of masculine king would have. And I talk about this with my friends a lot because I keep getting the question, well, who would you vote for today? Like, who would you follow today in today's world? What is some party you'd be affiliated with or person you'd be affiliated with? And I tell them no one even comes close. For me personally, no one even comes close to, and I will only follow an archetypal king. And who is the archetypal king? Well, they're sort of like the King Arthur of our times, right? They're the Aragorn from Lord of the Rings. Okay? Like they are someone who comes in with a message of purity and hope. And I'll tell you the third thing that's the most important, faith, because this is what these people lack. Like a good leader who has no faith, who doesn't exude faith, will always crawl back to the question of weakness. And the question of weakness is, well, well, okay, I'll give you an example like this. You believe in sort of like in spirituality, and you come to me and you tell me our children who are being born, they speak of a better world. They're tired of your BS, and they speak of a better world, but they don't have the know-how and the logic to tell you how to build it. But they speak of a vision of a better world. That's what our children are doing. 24/7, right? They're just telling us like intuitively, like, this is wrong, this shouldn't be happening, why are we torturing animals, so on and so forth. Get it?
Yes.
And and the king without faith, the king without a god, the king who does not serve that spiritual higher mind will always say, well, what do you want me to do? It's been like this forever. Well,
Mm.
we don't have a logical solution. And that is what we've seen in these political systems and ideologies, the capitalism, communism, all of the ideologies. They're just a struggle against the unknown because they try to put everything within the boundaries of a law and logic. But you can't put a divine world and a divine species, an inherently divine and spiritual species, within a box. This is literally what they're doing. That those are the two systems that they're running. They're running the pyramid, the pyramidal hierarchical scheme, and then they're running the cube, or sort of like the hypercube, right, of society, where there's this false idea of equality and equity and da 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 da. If you don't have faith that you'll be able to build a new type of society, and if you don't have the good intentions that come with, well, having that faith, you are not worthy of being followed. So when I talk about the archetypal king, it has to be someone that exudes such faith, such confidence. It has to be a masculine figure. They have to be, like I say, a protector first and a warrior second. They have to have all of the aspects, not just some, right? People will just latch on to some stuff like, well, he's a strong, sort of like strict ruler. Yes, but he's unkind. He's not gentle. He speaks in a vulgar way. You can't just ignore that, because when the archetypal king arrives, the human archetype of that, and it they will arrive eventually, because the archetypal king is sort of like this person that comes out of obscurity and finds himself, leading a small band of allies, and then they sort of like rise and create, well, Avalon, right, which is like the righteous knightly kingdom. uh, when they arrive, they will make the men of today look like absolute babies. They will make the men of today, who are considered like powerful and influential. I'm not even going to drop names. You already have like a few coming into your mind. They will make them look so petty and so cowardly and so disingenuous that everyone on the planet will think at the same time, like, how in the hell did I even follow this person who has so many faults, not human faults, because obviously they're going to be human as well. This person that we're talking about, this archetypal figure, they're also going to have their faults and shortcomings, but they're not going to be half half. But a lot of what we're seeing right now, especially in men in power, they're very radicalized. They're very half half. So they have like this, they either have a cowardice, right? Or they either have brutality. And neither of those are going to build a society that moves on to the next spiritual level. So I don't follow anyone. No one
Yes.
is worthy. No one is worthy of being followed.
I agree with you. It needs to be a noble man, a noble man. And you talk about cowardice and brutality. We have both in our current Prime Minister, Christopher Luxon. We'll get to him. I want you to look at his face. But there's so much to talk about from what you said. Taking it back to about 15 minutes ago, you mentioned it's not about the collective actually creating some utopia and then people just drop into that and don't have to do the work. What I totally agree with you about what you said, if I have this right, it is that we must do the inner work ourselves. This is an inside job now for each of us. What have I learned over the last 5 years? Where has this journey taken me? What has been the pain that I haven't been able to get past yet? Say with me, betrayals of people that I've helped, I get really stuck. I get hooked on that. I get, wow, I put everything on the line for that person and they're not even, appreciating it. And it's like, how can you get past that, Liz? You need to be bigger than that and then surrender into what that lesson has brought you. And that way you will use this as the engine room of your own development. And I think we each have to do that. We have to go inside and beyond that, I think also get in touch with whatever divinity we each choose to believe. For me, it is Jesus Christ. And to me, he was a noble warrior on this earth who came to show us another way and was someone
He
to be
was the
deeply
archetypal
admired.
king as well.
He
Yes.
was. He was.
Yes.
It's
Well, if you
beautiful.
look at it from that point of view, he carried all of the sides, right? So there is the idea of mercy, of knowledge, wisdom, just a high degree of competence,
Yeah.
someone who's very noble, someone who sort of like, well, initiates as well and stands up for what is right. Someone
No
who
matter the
professes
cost.
God. Yes,
Yeah.
no matter the cost. When you have a person like that, that's a very rare, even if you look at from something as narrow and niche and specific of an art as physiognomy, it's so rare to have that archetype born into a society and then that archetype make its way, like to how to say, like, healthy waters, I guess, right, you could call it. Yeah, it's so rare. But when someone like that arrives, they will very quickly be cut off without support, and that is the very rare human specimen that actually deserves to be followed and supported, right? The man in the arena, so to say, that is someone who will be willing to put everything on the line, type of thinking, right? yeah, look at what we did with the last archetypal king. Put him on a cross, right?
Oh,
Um, and now we have people coming out and sort of like there's been this movement of like degrading Christ into a less godly and less virtuous figure, and well they'll say, well, it's just like this regional god or this regional prophet. If someone says this, I will directly like say, um, they don't even believe it themselves, because when you read the story of Jesus Christ, no matter like which religion you're from and what you believe in and so on and so forth, uh, tell me one human being with a more exemplary story and message, like the divine message for humanity, who lived and breathed that message and who showed us Jesus is the only figure in human history. Again, doesn't matter what you believe in, you have to be objective about it. God is watching, and be honest about it, right? Is the only figure who, through the example of his own death, passing, and revival and resurrection, showed us that the soul is eternal. That was Jesus' message, not anything else. The primary message, the example of his life, was that the soul, the spirit, lives on and it is eternal. Here I am, I died, and here I am, I have returned. That is both the physical and symbolic and spiritual message of the um, Christ consciousness, so to say. So the highest type of information, the highest type of, if like this for the people who love to call our reality a matrix, I guess, the highest cheat code, quote unquote, that you and I have received, right, is that our spirits are eternal. Now, what are you going to do with that information? You see a lot of people who claim they're prophets and their prophecy. Oh, this the earthquake is going to happen. Okay, great, awesome, right? Um, what is that achieving? It's just feeding
mm,
your ego, it's just increasing, right? But the archetypal king decreases himself to increase everything else.
yes. I would say the second most important is what he said on the cross, which was, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. And one of the things that we all wrestle with when we want to transcend the hurt that somebody else appears to have caused to us is to, it's a twofold thing, I think, to say, oh, they really don't know what they are doing. They're not aware. And within that hurt, the fact that I'm hurt by that shows me that I'm also not fully aware yet, because he could take all of that horror. Yes, he despaired. He despaired just before that. He said, Father, God, wherefore art thou? Where are you? Where have you gone? Have you deserted me? But then he came back to, no, forgive them, for they don't know what they're doing, these cruel humans, because there's so much cruelty amongst humans at the moment, one to another or country to country. So it's so relevant, his message. And then he goes, it is done. So there was such a message on the cross about somehow transcending the pain, I think.
If he hadn't despaired, it would have shown me at least that, you know, he was not going through a human experience, but a human experience is one of imperfection. We are of imperfect design, and whether you like it or not, you could be a multi-dimensional God consciousness type of entity. But if you're going through, if you've fallen into our world, so to speak, in an esoteric sense, in a spiritual sense, if you're going through a human experience, then you are going to feel the full brunt and weight of the human experience. And that is all of the weighted emotions and the pains and sort of like the physicality of our material world that comes with it, and the weight of that. And that shows that it's basically impossible to not become despaired as a human. At certain moments, at moments of like, turmoil and significant like challenge and difficulty and hardship and adversity. But at the same time, the mission was completed regardless because he had faith.
Yeah, it's beautiful. Let's talk about this human form, about the physiognomy of the human form that we have, and why you chose to study this and what it's helped you to understand the human journey more fully and your own journey at a greater depth. Take us through what made you study it and what it really is about. How do you define this study of faces?
So the study of faces is called physiognomy. For the longest time, it was referred to, and it is still referred to, as a pseudoscience. And let's say someone like myself, who comes from sort of like an empirical, proof-based, like psychological science background. It's a strange thing to be getting into because everyone sort of like gives you a strange look or whatever. But I no one knows that I do it outside of my little cute little channel on the internet. The reason I got into it is because I was always naturally very gifted in this, and I imagine it's a trauma response to life. I believe it is, when you hyperfixate on small details and micro expressions of people's faces because you want to read their emotional state, sort of like what they're planning. But even outside of that, I always had a good intuitive feel for like people and emotions and faces, and I always knew there was some sort of like innate deep system, because I could have sworn when I was younger, when I was talking to people, that I was talking to very similar archetypes. It was almost like a rehashed version of the same archetype in another person, who they shared mannerisms, they would share facial features, they would share so many things. They would even share like their interests and their hobbies and the things that they talked about. So like from very early on, I knew there was something fishy going on there, right? So it's like, not you know what, we are all unique and we are all sort of like individualized, but there are also some very strong um, genetic archetypes that you can sort of like come across. And the strangest thing to me, at least back then, was that this is universal across all of the races and cultures. Uh, of course, some archetypes are more prevalent and dominant in certain peoples and nations and cultures, but for the most part, like in a temperamental sense, um, these same archetypes are found everywhere in the human race. So when you look at someone, like, I guess I call it formulaic physiognomy. When you look at someone in a formulaic sense, you can read them. So you can read what we call the outline or the canvas of the face, and that relates somehow to sacred geometry. And sacred geometry is the deep and symbolic study of geometric figures and their energetic implications, right? So let's say, I always tell people that if you want to find the secrets of this world and perhaps even the next one, you need to study the three shapes: the triangle, the square, and the sphere. And then their advanced versions, which are the pyramid, the cube, and the sphere sort of like stays the same, but in a three-dimensional sense. And then you can imagine, water flowing on top of these figures and where the water goes, and according to that you sort of like see like what kind of energetic archetype these geometrical figures carry, right? Now if you imagine droplets of water hitting a square, well, obviously, like, they're going to how to say, rest on the topmost surface, and they're going to sort of like equally distribute the energy all over it, right? So that sort of like tells you like temperamentally like what these figures represent. And these figures are found on the human physiognomy as well, with a lot more complexity than that, obviously. But and several other features and details that you can study. But no genetic predisposition and no genetic coding is by accident. Like, oh, Liz, you were born with this type of cranium. It doesn't just happen. Like, everything is indicative of everything else. That is sort of like the rule, the law of the esoteric mind, right? Everything can be found within anything else. Like,
Mm.
the wholeness of everything can be studied and looked at through anything as small as a molecule, right? So it follows that same pattern. And when we look at someone, we have these formulaic cheat codes, right? And AI has given us great proof of this. Why I mentioned, physiognomy was for the longest time regarded as a pseudoscience, and now it no longer can be, in my opinion, because they have AI programs with facial profiling with such incredible accuracy that the AI can predict the race of the person, their potential criminal records, right? It can predict so many things if you just show, like, in a formulaic sense, not in an intuitive sense. If you just show them a face of a person, right?
Wow.
And yeah, and this info, like, obviously they don't want you and I having this sort of like info. Like, there exists such a thing as, for example, like mainstream astrology, which is largely just like a cover, right? It's very shallow, whatever. It has like this strangeness to it. Okay, it's kind of accurate, but at the same time, it's not. And then there's physiognomy, which is like, oh, it's like a racist construct, blah, 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 blah. But in truth, physiognomy is incredibly accurate. And it can give you incredible, well, formulaic knowledge about a person. If, let's say, if you're an amateur or a journeyman practitioner. But then there's also this intuitive element to it, which is like the more holistic element to it, where you can sit with a person's physiognomy and sort of like meditate on the form.
Mm.
Um, if you are sensitive, right, and tuned in a little bit, you can get some strange infos about a
It's
person.
It's so
Yeah.
fascinating what you say. Just back to sacred geometry, there's a symbol within Maori, the Maori people here in New Zealand. It's called the koru, and the koru is the swirl. It's, if you think of a fern, in a fern, the frond of the fern is unfolding, and they're all the little circles, and then each one of those opens out into a leaf. So they go from the circle
Yes.
out into the leaf. Well, that's the koru shape. But then if you hold up a shell, and you see, okay, it's pointy and it's got a certain external shape, but when it's worn down by the ocean, you'll see inside the shell is the same circle. And so when you take just that simple example, sacred geometry has led me to the absolute understanding that Mother Nature is so extraordinary that she has come up with, as you say, these certain basic structural ways of building life on Earth. And then she just echoes them everywhere. She echoes them right through life. She's so brilliant.
Well,
Nature is so brilliant.
you mentioned the oldest sacred geometrical form in existence. Well, one of two. The swirl, and there's two types of swirls. Um, where sort of like the whole pie thing comes out of. And I guess our listeners are also interested in this, I guess. That is the oldest symbolic, well, I don't even know what to call it, like an icon that exists, one of the oldest ones that exists in the human psyche. And there are two kinds. One is the unfolding swirl, and the other is the swirl that's sort of the like the vortex that sort of like gets shuffled into itself. These are the two archetypal forces of meaning and meaninglessness, of emptiness and fullness, of the sort of like the rising of life and the destruction of it, and sort of like it being torn into the void. And I'll explain to you how both of these directions, they're the two holy directions. They are some of the oldest things in terms of sacred geometry that have been worshipped and are being worshipped today. So, for example, where does the 666 come from? Right? It's a Saturnian sort of like worship formula. Saturn is the sixth planet. Saturn has a hexagonal shape, a storm raging on its northernmost peak. A lot of people don't know this. And if you look at that storm, it's a swirl, and it swirls within itself and into itself, and it makes its form of the form of the swirl makes a six, and the six is the swirl that collapses onto itself, and sort of like think of like a toilet flushing, right? Um, so the swirl is perhaps the oldest symbol found in creation and nature, and it is found in two forms, which is what you mentioned, the swirl and the vortex. And the vortex is the unfolding force of creation, and the swirl is creation sort of like collapsing onto itself. So it's either something that's arising in containing of all and everything, or something that's consuming and absorbing of everything, like a black hole, right?
That's fascinating because it's such a symbol within New Zealand, and many people have surmised that the birth of the new world could happen here because this is the country that sees the sun first in the each new day. But at the moment, it seems to be collapsing on itself, and it's largely due. And we did promote this largely due to this woman whose facial structure we're now going to have a look at. It's largely due, the collapse of our society at the moment, to this woman, Jacinda Ardern. If we bring up a photograph of Jacinda, if you can have a look at her face.
It's a
And
lot of responsibility. So I don't know, like just this for sort of like context. I've seen like okay one or two pictures of this person from her because of our previous conversations. I just Googled her once, but I didn't even like get into it at all. I don't know them. I've never heard of them, so I don't
yes,
know like what they've sort of like been involved in and like what they've done. And like usually like when I do like a let's call this like a public like physiognomy reading, right? We're not doing it with like pre-existing bias, or you don't want to do it with like
yeah.
pre-existing bias, right? We're not like here to like personally attack people, but it's just interesting to see, right, what we can see. So yeah, I just pulled up some pictures of her, and let's do it like this. And for anyone else that we might sort of like read today, um, we can have questions, but first let's just observe.
Yes.
And then if it's someone that I completely don't know who they are, you could perhaps just give me like a short intro on like, okay, I think this person is, they work here, blah,
Yes.
blah, blah. That'll help me a little bit too. Um, but okay, like Jacinda Ardern. Um, well, her smile is her weapon. That's number one. As soon as you like look at her and her physiognomy, like her smile dominates most of her face. Um, it's a very toothy smile, mm, and if you focus on the canvas, like we said, the outline of the face, that's indicative. Like her physiognomy is indicative of someone who is an older soul. And when I say older soul, I mean like someone who has gone through a significant amount of reincarnative cycles in this world. So someone who has good natural health, someone who has sort of like mastered the material realm a little bit better than most people, like the average person. Um, and we start from top to bottom. So if you look at the outline or the shape of the top side of her face, and I'm not going to use any sort of terminology here because I found that a lot of people get like um, confused when I use specific terms for specific parts of the face. So I'm literally going to try to explain this like I would to a fifth grader, right? So if you look
Great.
at
Yeah.
if you look at the top of her face, right, she has the archetypal form, and the archetypal form of the top of the face is the spherical influence, the sort of like the circular shape. But it's also quite wide, and especially so for a woman. So it's sort of like not a feminine trait. So while she has a good sense of, like, she's a holistic thinker, right? So she doesn't think in terms of, well, step one and step two and step three. Like, it's she's not a chronology based mapper when it comes to mental mapping. And she's someone who has a very good view of the grand picture, of the big picture. Like, she's a big time. She thinks big time. She doesn't think small time. Um, and she has good intuition about it as well. But then you also have to understand that she has learned to think over time, and due to her experience and gifts, no doubt. She's learned to think like someone who's very chronological and methodical, right? But it's not an innate value. And then if you look at the middle part of the face, the outline of her canvas, you see those, sort of like protruding bones outwards. That's a triangular influence, right? That we see on the face. So it's a very sort of like wholesome, open, touchy feely, penetrative, sort of like a aggressive force, right? That allows her to sort of like dominate the space and interface with people on her own terms. So she's an initiate. She's a conscious initiator, right? So she's someone who will initiate action whenever she decides to, and she's also someone that doesn't shy away from, like I said, from being a little bit touchy feely. Get it? Like that type of thing. Like she's more physical than most women would be. Not physical in a violent sense, but physical in, like, it's like, she'll get her hands dirty type of thing. Like, she could push things into completion. So she has that conscious presence where, okay, I'm gonna go into this room and I'm sort of like going to increase the energy of the room through sheer willpower and get that done. And if you look at the bottom side of her face, and we're just doing the canvas now for us. If you look at the bottom side, I would say it's like a good mixture of a triangular form, like a triangular influence, and a spherical influence, but mostly triangular. So she's someone who's very action based, and she's very instinct based. So she's someone with very, very, very strong instincts and a desire to act, sometimes even act without thinking. She's someone who, yeah, is like an action first. I always like make the example here that, like, depending on like what the bottom of your physiognomy looks like, we sort of know how you'll react in critical situations. So for someone like her, like, let's say you punch her in the face, she'll punch you right back, right? She won't sort of like take a few steps back, reassess the situation. She won't like lean on past experiences and some sort of like a reference or a database of past experiences that she has to determine how she should act, but she will lash out very quickly and very emotionally. She's quick-witted. Like, she's really good at coming up with answers and replies in sort of like a quick manner. So it's really hard to catch her fully off guard. Um, and she's definitely, now let's read more into her other features, I guess. She's definitely someone who um has a lot of self-control in terms of like emotions, but publicly, like externally, so like it's very hard to get her in a situation where she will be, how do I even say this? Like, she would emotionally lash out. Like, she will always keep that smile going. She'll smile in your face, even if she's like incredibly angered or frustrated. Like, she will keep those appearances up almost no matter what. And she's vying for material and um, emotional independence as well. Like, it's her desire to do so. So I feel like when you look at her physiognomy, it's the physiognomy of someone who has a deep desire to um how to say, like, find individual like influence and power within herself. So it's all about that, yeah, like that individual growth. She's someone who has who takes a secret liking to luxurious living, but she will go out of her way to make it seem like she doesn't. Like she'll
Where do
go
you
out of her
see
way.
that? What part of the physiognomy gives you that? Because yes, I
Oh,
believe she's bought very
mhm.
very expensive properties since she was prime minister. Yeah. Where do
Well,
you
I
see
think
that?
well, we sort of like see that in her general form,
Yeah.
where her, like I said, her smile is her weapon, right? And we see that she is someone who can make herself seem very down to earth and small, but at the same time her interests are quite luxurious, and where she wants to go and where she wants to find herself is somewhere luxurious. Why you see this archetype in political, like female political figures, a lot, like a lot. And there's this little strangeness that this archetype also has, where it's like um it like almost all of these, they have like a little bit of a hunched back, right? If you see that as well, I've noticed that too. So definitely, like, um this archetype is found in politics so much because it's it can be quite self-absorbed, and it can be incredibly self-righteous, right? Now if this one thinks she's doing the right thing, right? um and she's sort of like the force of good, like we talked about, then that means automatically that you are not doing the right thing. So if she believes that she's doing the right thing, it means that you, whoever you are not doing the right thing. She's someone who is like a fear-based leader, um, who will respond to situations like in a very strict manner. You ever like seen like how like very strict mother treats their child who has no father figure in their lives, right? Like where they're overly strict and they're overly controlling, and they excuse it by saying, this is for your own good. I'm just trying to protect you, da, 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 and then they end up consuming their own child, right? They sort of like have this image of the all-consuming mother, right? Where like you feel like you're seeing like a face of empathy and sort of like humbleness, but behind that is a very
Mm.
deep fear. That's sort of like the something you get. And she has a lot of neutrality on the face as well, and she's very convincing, and well, she's also very relatable for a lot of people. And that's why if she has negative traits, it's more difficult to see negative traits on a person like that, because she has a very relatable face. She has very relatable physiognomy. um and she has richness of emotion too, and she's had a wonderful upbringing, in the sense of like mental growth and stimulation, physical growth and stimulation, really strong, really good upbringing. So she's had that sort of like, how do I say this, like, um like some people sort of like have the good life feature, and others don't, and she definitely has the good life feature, right? Yeah, like, and she's very naturally healthy too, like just surprisingly naturally healthy, and that sort of like plays into her attraction as well, right? She has a healthy heart, sort of like healthy body, strong immune system, um yeah, good inherent knowledge. So she's had a lot of like learned knowledge, like given knowledge, like inherited from like, either like family members, relatives, something along those lines. Definitely. um like she has many strong traits. Like it's a strong woman in the sense of like she's very capable in the things that she is capable in, she is very capable. She's very action based, so she has that sort of like masculine push you would need. Let's say if you're in politics or in a leadership position to take action. Now, whether that action is any good or not,
Mm.
that's for the masses to decide. But she is definitely someone who can act very quickly and boldly. She's quick witted. She'll make quick decisions. And she's sort of like a mixture between like an intuitive type, though I feel like she's more disconnected with her intuition, and someone who's like a learned chronological thinker. Like, by all means, she should not do well. Like, according to her physiognomy, she should not do well in any sort of corporate ladder. She should not do well there. So it's sort of like a little bit strange to me, like how she's found her way to, like, let's say, power and influence. Um, but like, it's not someone I would want leading anything, to be honest. Even though, like, she can have very like efficient and useful traits. It's This is not a leader, because this is someone who mostly acts out of self-interest and mostly acts out of impulse, unless like she has this incredible degree of emotional control and mastery, that like she's just immune to all of these traits that she's supposed to have, right? um and she can be empathetic as well, but her self-righteousness just covers that up, if you ask me, right? Like, her self-righteousness is sort of like so strong and so far gone that it sort of like puts a shadow over her empathy and her like empathetic system, and she has like a strong and convincing and very primal communicative function as well. Like, she doesn't shy away from saying many words, get it? Like, she'll bombard you with like information, and she'll bombard you with all of this emotional input to sort of like interface with her on a human level, right? And that's definitely her primary sort of like go-to, right?
Mm.
It's something that, like, when I Google her pictures, like, I can't find almost a single picture where she's not just like doing that smile. And when she's not smiling, right, on her physiognomy, you actually see quite a bit of disappointment, right? The smile just covers that up. But if you look at her picture where the smile is not present, she's someone who has experienced deep disappointment and deep hurt in her life. Um, and
Would you would
I
you
have a
say that
feeling.
goes back to childhood? Would you say
Yes,
there was betrayal there?
yes, I believe it does, and it would be from a male figure, like a masculine figure as well. Um, it's so apparent, and like I said, she sort of like innately, I think she understands that, and the smile is there to sort of like hide that a little bit, but um, yeah, she's a tricky one, and in a physiognomy sense, I like her because she has depth to her physiognomy, yeah, but she also wears everything like very openly, right? Um, she's she's a fun she's a fun girl, right? That I would call, like, she really likes to have fun, whatever that might mean. Like, she's a fun person, right? It's all about having fun and having a good time and being in places and going to places that feel fun and emotionally fulfilling, sometimes to the detriment of, well, everything, and perhaps her own like spiritual growth and mental growth as well. um the most important thing about her physiognomy, right? So I'm looking at this picture right now from her resignation speech, I believe. Jacinda Ardern chokes up while announcing pending resignation, right? Yeah, when you look at her face, she has a deep, deep disappointment that stems from some sort of um, and the strange thing is this as well, like she doesn't have any signs of like some sort of like traumatic, like significant event that happened, because we would know if she did. She has no signs of some sort of traumatic event that happened at any point of her life that sort of like caused her incredible torment or anguish, or even like some sort of like material deficit. None of this. I feel like she's had like a smooth path, more or less, far smoother than your average person. That's for sure. Um, so, but we do have like something in her midlife. I'm not sure how old she is now, but if you just have her age, something in like her midlife, that could have potentially caused this shift in attitude and temperament, right? Um, yeah, she's
Does she have any compassion in her face? Because I can tell you in New Zealand, when people who've been
yeah.
injured, people who've pleaded to have her hear their cries for help, there has been no show of compassion. And the other thing is, how has she lived with putting aside all of the harm she did to so many New Zealanders, to our society and to our families? What's in her face around that?
So she has what we would call limited compassion, where she'll pick and choose. Like we said, like her
Yeah.
self-righteousness overshadows completely her compassionate side. And I won't say that she has no ability to empathize. She does, and richly so. But she's a she's a picky character, right? So um, if let's say, I would say she's at least how she believes it probably is, she's taken up the mantle of the caring, strict mother, right? In her mind. And for her, it's like, if something is being done and if she believes that it's for the good of the people or the nation or whatever, like in a logical sense, she'll follow that up in a brutal way. So no emotions involved, shut it off, out of fear for the most part, right? Again, it's not something or someone I would want as a leader of anything. Where she would do really well? She would do really well in like the field of innovation. She would do really well in crisis management. She would do really well in the sort of like pushy uh, managerial position. But I think like as soon as she goes over the threshold and she actually has to be like a virtuous and sort of like wise leader that makes calculated, methodical sort of like decisions, or her nature is going to fail her there. And I feel like it does. And her way of sort of like band-aiding that is lashing out against what, she believes is, improper. um, yeah, she's definitely a strange character, and I feel like what shapes her physiognomy is this incredibly well hidden disappointment and sadness that she carries within herself, and it's hidden so well because she's such an actress. She's like so convincing, and she has the communicative function and sort of like the immediate um um sort of like communicative function and diplomacy to convince you of that, right? Like she's like this merry-go-lucky, happy, just I'm just one of you guys type of character, when at the same time she's carrying a lot of disappointment, and maybe even shame, or you know a sort of like a self-hatred, like a secret self-hatred. I would be very interesting to like um talk to her about these things, because I feel like she would be convinced that she's keeping that secret very well, and that it's like not visible at all, but it is, and she's not. Right.
Is she someone who is a liar? Do you see a liar in her face? Because when she rolled out COVID-19, I mean, she must have been part of this globalist World World Health Organization, WEF, UN terrible plan
Yeah.
to
So,
cause eugenics. So is she someone who
yeah.
is inherently secretive? Do you see that?
Um, so I'll tell you like this. If you've imagined yourself as a caring but strict mother, would you be totally okay with lying to your child if you thought it was for their own good? I think you
Oh,
would be, would be, right? And that's her way. That's her mental gymnastics around the lie, or around any sort of lie. If she's going to go out there and sort of like campaign for something or say something in a certain way, that's, I believe that that would be her mental excuse for it. Where, you know what, like, um, again, she's an elitist. Like, she's a very class-based person. She loves sort of like the idea of influence and power, and her being in this fun, luxurious state. She does, and she makes an effort to make it seem like, hey, we're all in this one group, we're all in this ship together, but she's not. She's on a yacht somewhere, right,
yes.
where everyone else are in rescue boats.
Yeah.
But then she'll, come down and she'll convince you that so I wouldn't necessarily even say that she is a liar. I would definitely say that she is okay with lying, if she believes that it's something that, this sort of elitism is what gets most politicians in trouble. And then why they have to like resign under like questionable circumstances and da da da. Because the moment you start disconnecting yourself from the average person, is the moment you sort of reject the average person, right? And you see this a lot. Um, yeah, unfortunately, in our politicians today, in every nation and country, because there's like this class segregation, right? And when you look at her, she's, she'll go to that like, you know big party type of thing. She'll go and like take in the sort of like the big lights. um she finds a lot of joy and meaning in those things, and like inherently that's not a bad thing, but at the same time it's a little bit self-absorbed, right? It's um again, like, as a leader, I would give her a as a potential leader, I would give her like a 2 out of 10.
Yes, so would most of New Zealand. Can you see from the physiognomy the future? Can you see things into her old age that she will carry that will haunt her?
I like when you read someone's face, you sort of like read the direction. We call it the deviations there. So you sort of like read, you're able to see the direction in which they're going, right? Um, the strange thing about her, I think, is that for her, it's like a more of a personal journey. I think she has to find, mm, personal healing more than, I don't think she'll even like function on that scale of like, okay, like how was I as like, let's say, a leader or so on and so forth. She has to like personally come to terms with a lot of things before she even gets there. And I think eventually, of course, like over time, that, as you approach sort of like the twilight years of your life, that naturally unfolds. um and again, I don't believe she's an inherently like deceitful or evil person, but I do believe that she hides her incompetences so well, right? So well, um um that she'll go and keep hiding them, even though, she's basically like destroying everything around her potentially. um yeah, it's like a, I feel like she would be much happier and much better off if she just focused on her creative artsy side, like her spontaneous side, like her improv side. Like I don't know why people like this even get into politics, and that makes me feel like they're not they don't just get there. Get it, Liz? Like they're sort of like pushed into it. Like
Yes.
she has a royal look to it, like a royal bloodline look to her. So I would not be surprised at all if we discover that she has some sort of like, super popular celebrity slash royal, ancient, bloodline or heritage. I would not be surprised at all, because to me it's strange. Like this is not someone who should or would excel in any sort of political arena. So how are they where they are? I always question things like that.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, most of it, I really concur with when you said she's not evil, I think she's been the most evil leader we've ever had. But let's move on to Christopher Luxon, who we currently have. I'd love to see what you see in his face. So it's Luxon, if you could bring up an image of
Okay.
him.
Christopher, Luxon.
Luxon.
Okay, and who
And
is
if
this
you
gentleman?
can't bring his face up, bring up Humpty Dumpty, because he always reminds me. So he's the current prime minister, and very much carrying on where she left off, as they all
Mm.
do. So, yeah, what do you see in his face?
Honestly, a lot of the same. It's a lot
Mm.
of self-righteous energy. Like he yeah, I would definitely say like this is a loyalist type of person, right? He's very adaptable. He's incredibly adaptable. He's very flexible, especially for a man. It's rare. Um, he has again like a probably a great holistic view of things. He's sort of like a mental specialist where he has like this area of expertise, and he can really excel in that particular area. Um, yeah, definitely a self-righteous person. Definitely someone who um, has had some sort of minor trauma during early on um, childhood, teenage years, and someone who has sort of like embraced their more unlikable side in the latter stages of their life, which is also very strange. Um, he can be someone who's highly intuitive, um, very adaptable. Like he can switch up really well.
Does that mean
Definitely.
he's open to being corrupted easily?
No, I wouldn't necessarily say so. I would say that he's, if he had to sort of like you can drop him in any situation and he'll like bob and weave his way out of it really well. He's very resourceful. He's also probably someone who's very opportunistic. Um, yeah, he has that sort of like sly smile that you see in people who are um like mentally very, quite overconfident, I would say. And I would be lying if I said he has duality on his face, because he doesn't. I would be lying if I said that he has like ill will on his face, because he doesn't. He's definitely someone that can be very obsessive minded. Like he can obsess over something, like some idea. It's probably like, like how some people, like when they get drunk, they repeat the same thing over and over. He's like one of those people. Um, like he has a very specific, narrow uh, quantity and amount of thoughts that he'll just go through. He's a very obsessive character, 110%. He's all tunnel vision. Um, yeah, he is a holistic mind, but like in an expressive sense, he's definitely someone who has very narrow interests, like only a few interests. Like it's a person who doesn't have many interests and doesn't see the value in most things, right?
What
Definitely
would you
someone who is
say? What would you
Yeah,
say drives him? Would his interest be making money? Does he have that sort of face of a grasping sort of person? That it's about money in the
I
end?
think he's a self-righteous person that wants to see his own version of the truth materialized. And he has experienced the full breadth of all emotions in his life, be it like anger, sadness, joy, pleasure. So in many ways, like he has a balanced face, but definitely someone who can be like secretly. It's almost like it's hidden. Like these aspects on these people are so well hidden because they're old souls, and they have all these layers and defense mechanisms. And I'm sure like most of these politicians have like coaches that teach them like about micro expressions and mannerisms to use and poses to stand in and get it. Like it's more difficult to read this, but his dirty secret is that he's very obsessive. He's an obsessive personality. And sort of like recently I feel like he's let loose in a moral, in an immoral sense, I would say. He's someone who can be a little bit petty, right? He's definitely someone who, mm, like he reminds me of Jack Nicholson a little bit with like, like Jack he has a very pushy type of energy and pushy type of brown. He's those sort of like has that psychotic energy about him, right? And I can totally imagine him because of his physiognomy. Like I said, massive opportunist, incredibly flexible, adaptable, very confident way of talking. Like he's not charismatic, but he's just going to outconfidence you in like how he'll choose to communicate. Um, yeah, he has a particular, like a very specific goal that I feel he's secretly obsessed with, and that's his prime source of motivation. What that goal is, I have no idea, but I can tell you 110% that this is a very obsessive personality.
Is there a cruelty in there, do you see?
Yes, I believe there is. I believe there is. If their obsession is something of sexual nature, which it could be, or if their primary drive is something like, these types of archetypes, they tend to fetishize a lot of things, right? And if one of those fetishizations is some sort of like cruelty or violence or like commanding power and domineering over the other, yeah, I could totally see. Yeah, cruelty, very possible.
Do you think he knows how disliked he is? He's not respected. He put up something the other day about digital ID, and I couldn't find one comment that was in his favor. Like
He
people,
doesn't care.
he doesn't
He
care.
doesn't care. He
Wow.
genuinely doesn't care. Like Jacinda, like she cares because she cares about appearances a lot. Like we said, she
Yeah.
cares about what like her image is and how she's presented to the public. This guy, he doesn't even care. As long as his obsession is met, he doesn't care. He genuinely doesn't care.
That's dark. That's dark. What does he care? What do you see in his face would make him stop and
For,
change his mind and listen? Because he doesn't listen so far.
well, for most of these types of characters, it's very difficult because like everything in their external is telling them that they are right and you are wrong. They're in power and you are not. So it's very difficult to get a read on that. But I believe like if it was me, if it was up to me, I would put most politicians in mandatory therapy. Like if you're a politician, you have to go to therapy. You have to. There's no other way around it. They probably still go, but to the wrong people. And yeah, some people know what I mean here. But I, like I feel like he's such a, like, without offending anyone or even people who carry this archetype, like to me, this is an archetype that has like three interests, right? And everything else, nothing else exists or matters for them, right? Like, and they'll just like hyperfixate, they'll obsess over, and they'll fetishize, and and they'll just pursue that for the sake of how to say, like this sort of like pleasure or like this bliss like wash over them. It's a very like visceral emotional thing, right? And these types of archetypes are very emotional in their pursuits, and what they pursue is like it has a lot to do with the senses and like the sensations and like, oh, like feeling empowered or something like that. So it's difficult for me to say like, okay, like what would help. Well, um, uh, someone to like an authority figure, but it's so difficult to have an authority figure in your life when you are the authority figure, right?
Ah, it's interesting. Yeah, he's not liked. He's not trusted, and there's good reason for it. Very interesting. Okay, I'd like you to read my face.
Okay. Mm, so you have a very strong genetic code. Like everything is like everything is like very intensely presented on our physiognomy. Um, you are someone who is naturally a systemic thinker. You are someone who's sort of like very orderly in their way of thinking, but recently that has changed. So like very recently, I feel you've become a little bit more intuitive, a little bit more in touch with sort of like the more flowy and smoothened out parts of your psyche. But naturally you're someone who's like a pusher, like you know how to push. You're like a, you have that, you have like that masculinity to you, through your physiognomy, definitely. And you're someone who can compete, um you know with men in that regard as well. You're a very big pusher. You're also someone who's very touchy feely. You're someone who can like push and has that penetrative force, and you can move things forward and get shit done, type of thing. But you have a very earthy and grounded base. Like the people we read so far, they also had this these attributes, but they're also instinctively action based. You're instinctively not action based. You are instinctively very grounded, and you like to collect knowledge and experiences to have that database of references upon, like you'll summon that up when you're in this critical situation and you don't know what to do, right? You will act according to your past experiences. So let's say we had the example of a person, like if you punch them in the face, they'll just punch you back. That's purely sort of like primal instinctive. With you, how you will behave is according to how you've mapped it out in your mind. So probably in the way you think, you're a planner, right? So you like plan for different types of situations. Like, oh, if this happens, then I'm going to do that. If that happens, I'm going to do this. Da, 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 da. So there's this like constant like, sort of like diplomacy with the self of like, okay, how would we behave if this occurred? Da, da, da. You don't do well in like when it comes to like spontaneity. You don't do well naturally, and I feel like you've had to learn that. Like you've had to sort of like learn how to, okay, this is happening quickly, let's mobilize. Da, da, da. You've had to learn that. So when you consciously go for that, you have more success there. But if it's something that has to be like some sort of like instinct or quick wit, or it has to be some sort of immediate action, sometimes you might freeze up. And I feel like you've had to learn that, like learn how to manage that. You're more of a generalist and holistic type than someone who has an obsessive personality and someone who tunnel visions into things. But you actually have, in my opinion, also displayed signs of tunnel vision as well in like how you speak. So I feel like you've been in like careers, the types of careers that really require that for you to, so like become very analytical and almost like an investigator, right? And you've sort of like had to learn that on your deviations layer, right? We see that even though your natural imprint is not of someone who's like super analytical and like almost like an individual investigator, we definitely see that that's where you're moving towards, even though you're much more of a generalist and you're much more of a plug and play, feel the situation type of person than not. You can be very logical, you can be very methodical, but you can also be like, you do really well where the laws and boundaries and rule set are very well defined. You do really well in these sort of again, like the career ladder, you do really well climbing it, right? In any sort of like hierarchical system, you would do really well in climbing it. But it would come at the cost of sacrificing some of your happiness. And I feel like that's been a theme for you a lot. You're someone with good balance. You know, sort of like how to handle your money and energy. So you don't just give it away for free too much, but also you're not too, you know, like you're not too selfish with it either. Your communicative function is very different than you're not an emotional communicator. You are an efficient communicator. Um, and I would definitely say where you struggle and where your archetype usually struggles is in um, creating the nothing, creating the something from the nothing, right? So that's why that you need sort of like constant feedback loops from the external world to, shape imagery and create, your worldview, and sort of like feed your worldview with all this external information, and then sort of like put that into order and like manage that in a sort of sense. You're someone who takes an existing system and then can not only enforce that system but upgrade it. So if you I would say your cheat code in life, at least according to your physiognomy, is you take an existing thing and then you make it more, like you quantify it, you just upgrade it, you just scale it. Maybe that resonates.
Interesting.
Even like all of the people that we read today, even the people that we mostly sort of like read in a negative context, well, because that's what we see on their face, we have to be objective. They also have their highest forms. Like if you take Ardern, right? She would do really well in other fields, and I feel like she would find a lot more happiness in those fields. She's just in the wrong arena, and because she's in the wrong arena, all of the worst of her archetype most likely is coming out. Right? Same for the other guy. Like if what are you doing in politics? I would tell him, like, I really would, like, if they're listening in, I would say, what are you doing in politics? You should be a watchmaker. That'll bring you some. Yeah, obsess over the art, right?
Yes. I
Fetishize the
think
art.
I think a lot
And
of New Zealanders would be happy if Luxon wasn't our prime minister, was
well,
making watches.
I don't even say it in a mean way.
No,
Get it? Like,
you
I say it in
don't.
like, they would find happiness there. They would.
Yes.
And I feel like they're looking for their happiness elsewhere, where they just don't fit in. Like, in my mind, right? What are you doing in politics if you're in there for only for personal gain? Like, let's be honest. Like, you are
Yes.
capable of achieving that position of power, but just because you're capable of it doesn't mean you'll do good there, right? Like, that's my problem with most of the physiognomies that we see with politicians. I'm like, why are you doing this? Like, okay, like, do you want power? Do you want influence? Do you want, like, I'm sure like they think that they're gonna be like hyper vigilant and super effective and help a lot of people. No, no, no. But when you don't have the traits for it, like, I'm not gonna go and play in the NBA. Okay, I don't have the traits for it. I'm sorry, right? Um, yeah, I don't have the height for it. I don't have the athleticism for it. I don't have the patience for it. Get it? Like, all these things. But I'm gonna go and do physiognomy readings. Like, we all have to sort of like play into our role. And I feel like some people, especially those like and this is my conspiratorial idea about it, I guess, but especially people who are sort of like feel like they're just put in there, like
Yes.
like they're like placed there. Like, how do you get in that room? Like, strange.
Well, let's on that note have a quick look, because it could be in depth, but let's have a fairly quick look at Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Is he out of his depth, or is he in the right place? And why is he taking so long to call out the
Robert
mRNA?
Kennedy Jr.
Yeah, Robert Kennedy Jr.
Oh, this is a man whose physiognomy is a total mess.
Really?
And yeah, and I feel like this is the quintessential corruptible man.
Wow.
If you look at physiognomy, yeah, like um, it's someone who, like, it's someone who will campaign and stand for the right thing, and they have a good degree of empathy, and they're very academic about things, and they're very well educated, and definitely an old soul, and definitely someone who has like incredible mental capacity, and someone who can also be a little bit flexible, and has someone who could be like a strong diplomat, and someone who's sort of like healthy in their age. But it is the how do I say this? Like, I don't want to say mean things about people, but it's just true, right? Like, it's a corruptible character, and that's their temptation. That will always be their temptation.
Where do you see
Yeah.
that? Is that in the eyes, or is it in the shape of
In the eyes, in the nose, in the lips, everywhere, in the general shape. Like, it's someone who, like, it's someone you can buy out. Remember when we talked about the archetypal king, the archetypal king will never be someone who can be bought out, and this man can be bought out.
Interesting. A friend who's married to a Russian woman was telling me Putin gave a speech a few weeks ago in which he was saying to the Russian people there are three hugely important things: family, and your principles, and God. He was really emphasizing, come back to the family structure, and have a set of principles. And he mentioned God, which is amazing, given that that's such a turnaround. For a long time, God was not allowed to be talked about in communist Russia. And now in the West, often God is being derided. And look at the UK. You can't talk about God, and yet you can talk about Islam. We have a king who's
Can you say, "Oh my God"?
Yeah.
Are you allowed to say it?
It's crazy in the UK. I mean, I just wondered if Vladimir is developing, but in his face, just briefly, you don't see that. You don't see. No.
Because I know how they think, and everything that's done in Russia is not done for the outside world. They don't care about the outside world. What they care about is everything that's done in Russia and said in Russia is set for the local populace. Like, just to give people more context on like why I say this like with such confidence. If you live in Russia, let's say you live in rural Russia, like the conditions are terrible. You're freezing your butt cheeks off. If you have a problem in your town, right? And your town has a mayor, and that mayor, answers to someone else, and that someone else answers to someone else, and that someone else answers to Vladimir Putin, right? If you need something fixed, people don't come out and say, "Vladimir Putin, we have terrible conditions here in our village. 70% of our village doesn't even have an indoor bathroom." That's a real statistic, by the way, in Russia. They will come out and say, they will appeal to the master. So it's absolutely not allowed to criticize the governing party. So you will never hear anyone in Russia talking badly about Vladimir Putin. What they will do is they'll come out and they'll say something along the lines of, "Our mayor is not doing their job well. If Vladimir Vladimirovich knew about this, he would surely come here and scold them." So how they're appealing to it is like, well, Vladimir Putin is our glorious, wonderful leader. And it's not that he doesn't want to fix our lives. It's just that he's not informed. They're not informing him well enough of our troubles, but he cares about little Taganrog Russia, right? Or something along those lines. So when when Putin comes out and he mentions God, it's aimed at sort of like the regular masses. We're Orthodox Christians. We share a faith. Let's say with the Russians. Um, it's for them to feed into the idea of, yes, we have humble living, but look at the West. They're all homosexuals. Look at what the West is doing. And here, God resides with us. But what a lot of people don't know, for example, is on Putin's last term, he has an army of, well, I don't know, this is going to sound fantastical, but you can look it up. He has an army of witches who will pray for his, or I don't know, cast some sort of like strange, witchy spells to keep him in power, right? Now, if that is a Christian ruler, right, you have like a society of like an association of like witches who are praying for you. What is happening, right? Now the Russian Orthodox Church, that is fully taken over by the KGB. It's just like another sort of like a arm of the KGB, right? So you don't really get to talk about God. I think this is my personal opinion. You don't get to talk about God, and we can talk about Ukraine and the many sort of like the sort of like the corruption and stuff like that that's there, and in all of these Eastern European countries, including Russia, by the way. But the moment you start bombing churches and monasteries and like, civilian target, like I don't think you get to talk about God in that regard. I don't think you get to look at the West and be like, look at these Westerners, they've forsaken their God. And then the next thing you do, like you go through Chechnya and mow down children with tanks, or you genocide, right? Like all of Caucasia. And then you go through Dagestan and cause all kind of havoc there. And then, you go through Georgia, and then you go through Ukraine. Like there's this pattern, right? That history will not look back on in 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 a friendly sense, so to speak, right? And the pattern is like whoever happens to be, a neighboring state or nation to Russia, their women and children get to suffer a lot. And the only reason for that is not NATO expansion, is right. That's not the only reason. The reason there is like there is a very big growing imperialist sentiment. And I talked to a lot of Russians who fled Russia, due to the war, mostly young men who didn't want to get signed up for the, like the meat blender, the meat grinder. And they come here, and they're usually mostly very cordial, very nice people. Like, they're very quiet. They keep to themselves. They always say hello, goodbye, thank you. Like, there's no like sort of like that animosity. And I feel like they expect, the people here in Georgia to have that hostility, and we don't. But at the same time, like a really good quote that I know is that like, they asked this Georgian man, I believe, like, what kind of Russian do you love, right? Or like, when can you love a Russian? And he answered like, when he's alone, when it's just him. They're great people. You can have a great conversation, but put them together, right, and put a gun in their hands, and then the imperialist programming, starts to take shape. And their whole idea of is like, we're the godly people, and there's the degenerate West. And then if you look at their neighboring regions, let's say the Caucasus region, where I'm from, to them we are um, um, barbaric, right? We're very like primal and animalistic. And their idea of it's like, well, we're going to go into this region and bring our civilization there, right? And it's an imperialist attitude. I understand that much, you know, and the strong do, dominate the weak, unfortunately, in this world. But yeah, I don't think you get to talk about, God, and you know have people believe in, like, that you hold some sort of belief in God. And if you look, if you really want a good example of the brutalities, like some of the brutalities Russia has inflicted, just go and look up footage from the two Chechen wars. You think, like, Gaza is big in scale, for example, right? And the
Mm.
tragedies that happen both Gaza and Israel and like that part of the world, they're brutal. But like, like mothers eating their own babies is another level of brutal out of starvation. Get it? Like, it's no less, just because like there's more war stuff that's reported on nowadays, and you have like more access to footage and sort of like the horrific realities of it. You can go and read up on it and just look at the Chechen wars and sort of like what happened there and how the locals were treated by Russia. And some of the people who are now in leadership and highly influential positions in Russia, the comments they had made about the people and what they were doing to them there, I think like it'll break your heart a lot, right?
Wow. You know that mothers eating their own children. I didn't even read about that when I read about the siege of Leningrad. And that was where there was major starvation. You know, when,
Mm.
when Leningrad was surrounded and people were, I mean, they were eating snow, trying to get nutrition from frozen water, you know?
War in
But
the Caucasus is very brutal. There's like it's different
wow.
because the attitudes are different. Like, you know, um, in Abkhazia, or what they call it today, where there was a civil war here, the Russians used the same tactic as they did with Ukraine. And why wouldn't they? Because it works really well. Where they'll say, but there are Russian citizens in that region, and we are responsible for those Russian citizens. No matter what their numbers are, let's say there's 500 of those, and we're going to bring in our peacekeepers now, right? To sort of like aid them. And those peacekeepers, they're not 100, man. That's a whole battalion, right? So there's the sort of like the post-Soviet army like pushing in, and the brutality of that war. Like, if you want to know the stories of it, and like everyone sort of understands like the and I hate putting it like this, but like the usual things that happen in wars, such as like sexual violence and so on and so forth. But there's another degree of brutality, right, that sometimes men and nations will allow them to go to. And one of that was like, okay, they cut off the head, they cut off the heads of soldiers, and they used the head. They played football with it in
Oh,
front of their children. Okay. Um,
oh no.
and now, when you think like, what can drive a person to such frenzy and fervor to even like admire the creativity of the act, right? Like, um, so like I think the West is very misinformed about what Russia is. And I think like when a lot of like even Americans will say, well, we don't have any reason to, dislike Russia. Well, yeah, I don't have a reason to dislike the average Russian either. I have great friends from Russia. But you would be surprised. I think like the average American would be very surprised. And I posted about this too a while back, of like just how much the average Russian imperialist preys on the downfall of your economy, right? And when you hear stuff like that, where you can't even imagine it to be like, no, it's just like propaganda. It's not true. But like I know people who were there, right? I know people who like had the stories. I know people who saw it, right? And it's war, of course, like brutalities happen on both sides, but that level, that degree of just complete, total dehumanization, right, is something I believe only like a communist imperialist country can achieve, where you dehumanize the human being to such degree that you're willing to like cut off their head and play football with it in front of their like 10-year-old children. Like that's a completely different level of like, psychotic, right?
God, man's inhuman capacity for inhumanity towards his or her fellow man is just unbelievable. I'd never heard that story. That is just, and yet I
There's
would
more
put
like
the
that
other
for sure.
side. I would put the other side that from the West, I have known since the beginning of this whole invasion of Crimea and the whole, I knew that it was NATO that was always trying to goad Putin and push him, and that he could have taken far more extreme steps against NATO's push forward and NATO's breaking of previous agreements. NATO
They're
has
guilty
really
of that
been the
too.
aggressor, but Putin has withheld, and he has been sanguine in the way he's waited it out. And he seems to care that there isn't a kind of world war situation there. Well, certainly from my perspective, I've seen positives in Putin's behavior. What would you say to that?
So I think Putin, not recently, because I feel like the age has gotten to him a little bit, and he's become a little bit emotional. Because, well, when men like that approach like old age, like they become unpredictable. But before, like, he played his chess so perfectly, and you have to admire for that. I heavily dislike him, but I still admire his strategic understanding of geopolitics. And he would never have made the mistake of entering into Crimea if he was in his prime, in my opinion. Um, and I'll tell you why. Right? Um, NATO is definitely, in many ways, guilty of being the utmost greedy, selfish amalgamation of interests that exists. Because, like, you have your grip on almost half of the world, yet you're still pushing for more. Why? Right? That was always the question. But at the same time, if you look at it from both sides, but Putin has said this to a high-ranking sort of like local official here that I found very indicative of how he views these things and how he thinks in general. And he says, about the people in the Caucasus, for example, he said, you're not Slavs, so these are not Slavic lands, and I have nothing personally against you, but you are all going to be conquered because of your geopolitics, because of where you are, right? And I think, like, he's just very cold and calculated in how he thinks. Like, he's like, well, okay, my opponent played this, you know, on their turn, they moved the
Yes.
chessboard this way, and I'm going to move it that way. And if it means like a bunch of like 125,000 of my Russian youth will die, well, so be it. And that's how he thinks, and that's scary, right? When someone's willing to make such a huge sacrifice. And again, like, like Russia is a thing, like their presentation skills on the global scene are very weak, but internally their propaganda is insanely effective, is
Wow.
insanely strong. So when he sort of like invades a neighboring country, and I would be lying if I told you that, like, oh, this is because of NATO, because even when NATO was not in the picture, Russia was still it still had its imperialist ambitions. I mean, it's a huge country, very powerful. Why wouldn't it have imperialist ambitions? And it's sort of like, it annexed territories and it invaded, and then it took over a chunk, and that's its way of ensuring that NATO can't come in and sort of like grab that country on its own, because the portions of the country, the chunks of the country, like in Ukraine and Georgia and so on and so forth, it belongs to Russia. So they can't be included in NATO. That's its sort of like, mechanism of like disallowing these countries to join in. But I'll tell you what the other side of that is as well, where, if you live under Russian rule, you don't live well at all. Like, your living conditions are terrible. The economy is terrible. The TV is terrible. You know what the food isn't nice, right? Like, in the rural areas. If you go to Moscow and St. Petersburg, it's going to feel like, oh my God, this place is heavenly. But you go to any rural area of Russia, and the living conditions are horrendous.
Wow.
So when people from my country and my region, and regions like Ukraine and Poland, Latvia, Lithuania, so on and so forth, like Estonia, they look at the West and they see, wow, the quality of life in the West is incredible, right? Compared to this, right? Of course, there's this inner sentiment of like, hey, I want NATO too. And NATO is like, sure, okay, like, just, come right in. We want you in too, because we're just going to grow bigger. But the problem is, if Russia was an actually attractive destination where like the quality of living is good, then this problem would exist, right? If Russia was actually a country where people, but they're an imperialist country and they have imperialist tendencies. So we know that, let's say, if you live under Russian, not even rule, but if you live under Russian influence, right? The Russians that are going to start coming into your country, right, as tourists, and they'll buy everything out and they'll treat you like second-class citizens, and no one wants that. So yeah, some countries are stuck in the middle of these two juggernauts just vying for control. Both of them have their own excuses and arguments, right? One is like, let's say, the Russian side of it is very physical and it's very like war based and it's very material, and like if you screw with Russia, so to speak, like, yeah, you'll have to go to war. But the West is more like, they're more cunning and they're more tricky in what they do. They're like a philosophical, ideological entity that sort of like invades your culture and that undermines that culture and takes away its conservative everything, like its religion and so on and so forth. And it just turns you into like this vassal state without firing a single bullet. So like you can imagine the experience of someone who's lives where I live, who's not like too well educated, right? And they're like, well, like, what do I do? Like, what do I do? Do I say no to my quality of living and like push myself into like this war state to defend my independence and my country? Or do I say no to all of my culture and ideology and religion and spirituality and tradition and embrace this this other juggernaut that's so like vying to take all of that away from me? And I feel like more people are willing to lose the cultural inheritance and the ideologies because of the new generations coming up than going to war again, because there's only been war right in this region.
It's the war machine. I mean, in the UK at the moment, a lot of soldiers are pulling out of the army because they will not go to a war that is started by Starmer. So much do the British people despise Starmer. But that was a fascinating account. Gosh, I've been very strong that NATO should be collapsed. I think it's so corrupt, like everything else in the West. All the big institutions are utterly collapsed and they're getting so big and cumbersome. We need to go back to small and sovereign states and decentralization, in my view. But it's interesting what you said about Putin softening a bit. A Russian friend told me, I think he may have had a child in the last year. It hasn't been publicized, but I think he has a son of just a bit over one. Yeah, just over one.
He's very secretive about stuff like that. Yeah.
Maybe he is staring into that great abyss of his own mortality and wondering what kind of a world he'll leave his son.
Surely he is.
Yeah,
Surely
yeah.
he is. It matters a lot to him. Yeah. He's a real, like, what I can say about him is that he's also an obsessive personality, and he's obsessed with the legacy of, because he's devoted his whole life up. Like, a lot of people don't know, but Putin used to be a KGB agent.
Yes.
So if you want to get anywhere in Russia, in any like powerful or influential position, you have to go through the KGB. And then, as him being a KGB agent, he served, well, Mother Russia, I guess, in his own mind, like, for so many years. And then as president now, and he's served, like, he's devoted his life to this juggernaut that he's built. And of course, like, he wants to go out with a bang. And that's why he made the mistake of actually falling for the bait of putting his youth into this war, into this sacrificial death cult meat grinder, right? That's only going to cause suffering on both sides. I feel like if he was in his prime, he would not have done it. But because he feels like his time is sort of like coming, he got a little bit, too overzealous. And usually, like, you see him like so calm and so cold blooded and so, like, and I didn't see that. I saw like a lot of like anger and frustration in him in the past few interviews that he's done and throughout these last few years as well. It's not the Putin we know that's like the KGB agent Putin, who's like just devoid of like emotion and super hyper rational and da da da. So I don't. Do I think he's grown like in empathy and spirituality? I don't think so, but he's definitely gotten more vulnerable to emotion, right? As he would, like if you're him, I believe, and if you devote your life to this thing, right? And you're sort of like a relatively godless character, right? Even though he talks about God, the things that he's done, you have to be a godless character, right? Like to do those. When you think about like when your time is coming, all you can really think about is death, right? Like
Mm.
you don't think about the afterlife, you don't think about, so all you can think about is death and legacy, right? And I
Mm.
think he wants his legacy to be like, he wants to put a stamp on it so bad. And now he's sort of like gotten into this war that his generals told him like, hey, we'll beat Ukraine in 3 days. Can you believe it? Like the amount of, like people don't know how big Ukraine is, firstly, right? Ukraine is huge. It's massive. Like people think like when they talk about Ukraine, and I say this about Americans mostly, and some Brits as well sometimes. They talk about Ukraine like it's someone's backyard. Do you know how large Ukraine is? It's flat land, right? It's incredible volumes of flat land. Like to conquer a nation like that, you need to cover so much open ground. So if you look at combat footage from Ukraine, you'll see that a very large portion of it is just flat open ground. That's why it's always a stalemate in Ukraine. Like it's not like a mountainous region like the Caucasus, like where like you'll have like these like guerrilla fighting style, small skirmishes. No, it's like this massive open field, right? So for them to tell Putin and for Putin to believe that they would take Kiev and Ukraine in 3 days. Wow, like to me that shows that like you know Putin would have like Prime Putin would have never made that call. Like he must have known. He must have known that, and Ukrainians by all means they're also Slavs. They're a Slavic people, and you should also know the psychotype of those people. Slavs are incredibly stubborn. They will fight to the death. They might not be the best at it, okay? They might sometimes be very stupid and reckless about it, but that's what makes them dangerous because they will never give up, right? Like they're too stubborn to give up, and they have incredible immune systems. They can Slavs are the best. They are the most effective in long-term combat, right?
Wow.
And every war that's been fought on Russian soil has been a testament to that. The longer the conflict rages, the stronger they become because their immune systems don't deteriorate as much as everyone else's, right? Um, so that war is going to go on for such a long time if Daddy Trump actually doesn't do a virtuous great thing. I will change my mind on him so much if he actually is able to stop the war without giving everything to Putin, right? If he's able to stop the conflict and the killings and like, I will be happy, right, to see that because if you understand even the basics of like how military operations and wars are conducted, man, Ukraine is such a difficult target to take because you need to put your men and your machinery through a constant meat grinder. And now
Yes.
with the introduction of drone-based warfare, that becomes even more brutal because if you're not behind the trees, you're out there, you're open, you're seen. And there's not a lot of trees on those fields, right? I really urge people to look at Ukraine firstly on the map, and then, let's say for Americans, like just compare the size of Ukraine to the size of certain states, just so you get an idea of how large of a country Ukraine is, right? Because a lot of people think it's like this small plot of land that it's a massive country.
What would you liken it to size-wise? Not as big as Texas, or yeah, I'll have a look at that. Can you compare it with a state?
So Ukraine is basically the same size as Texas, I would say. Yeah.
Wow,
Yeah, it's as large as Texas, I
I
would say. Yeah.
didn't know that.
Yeah,
Gosh,
it's
talking geopolitics with you is absolutely fascinating. Absolutely fascinating. I want to leap over. Because I feel I've kept you talking for. I mean, it's just wonderful talking with you. Honestly, it's so
likewise.
expansive, and it's so interesting where we can go, the directions we go in. But I wanted to have a quick look at Charles from the facial structure, King Charles, because I think
Oh,
he
okay.
needs to go. There's been a big story today that Andrew was right in the thick of it. James O'Keefe has put this out, evidence that he was right in the thick of it with Epstein, absolutely implicated in the rape of underage children. It's just revolting. And
And
so
this is
this
new
is
news.
Prince
I haven't
Andrew.
heard of this.
Yeah, James O'Keefe has gone into hiding because he has this story that cuts right through to the heart of the monarchy. And we know the British monarchy is implicated in so much of the darkness in the world. And here we have Charles, who is betraying his own people, he's no longer the defender of the faith in England. He's warbled on about, how Islam should be the group that everybody honors, when he should be defending the Church of England from the Islamic invasion, actually. So I just wanted to look at his face and then finish off with a couple of people. I may or may not put them up. A couple of people who've been really personally very, very, very violent towards me. And I'm not sure whether I'll put this up because I wanted to see what you pick up. Because I think they may be paid by the government. So that may be something I hold back for now. But let's just have a look at Charles to finish off. What do you see in his face?
Oof. Well, he has a very primal archetypal face. And there's some things that I'm willing to say, and there's some things I'm not willing to say. And most of the faces we read today were very shallow readings. But by design. Um, um, and we can do it like off camera, like actual like in-depth like intuitive readings. We just basically explored the outline and the canvas of the face. And I won't go too much into it, and off camera I would.
Yes.
But for him, he has a very primal, very animalistic face, and it's such a like an ancient bloodline. It's such like a you know he's the real deal. In that sense, he's absolute the real deal. He's a big energy vampire. King Charles, or King
Wow.
Charles. He's a big energy vampire. Yeah, and he's also I wouldn't even say an obsessive personality, but he's a big melancholic, like a very melancholic character. And he's someone who also fixates, and he's someone who also obsesses. And you see that a lot in these like sort of like these royal, highly influential people. They're very like tunnel vision based. And I think you have to be, because like you have to be hyper focused on something to like so much to like to sort of like fight to it. Like your ancestry has to be like hyper focused on these things to get to these positions of incredible influence and power. um yeah, I mean, he's a very he has a very he has a lot of hidden aspects on his face, very esoteric. He's a very enigmatic character, and he's far more primal than not. Like most of his gifts and most of his power and most of his energy is non-conscious. Like he has limited awareness, but he's such a animalistic primal force. Um, big energy vampire for sure. Um, yeah, I can tell you more off cam about all of them really. Like you know, apologies to the listeners. I know like the readings were relatively shallow, but that's by design because there are some things that I would rather not say like openly. Um, and that's just how it is, right? These are very powerful, influential people, and they have their positive traits and strong traits, and they also have their darknesses and their little secrets, and like
and you
yeah.
can see that. So just on that, there were a couple of things I wanted to know, that if we put this out, that you are safe. So when we talk about Putin, I don't want to put anything out that could possibly compromise you.
No, I don't think like there's any threat in that regard, and we just sort of like who even cares, like if someone hears this like and they don't even believe in the thing, they can just say like it's probably some BS or whatever. So there's really no, like, there's a lot of people, there's people who have gone on like live TV and like, I don't know, swear to Putin's mom. I don't know why you do that.
Yeah.
You have to be all kinds of fool to do that, but yeah, like I
Because
don't
I'm
feel like
I'm
in danger in that sense.
I'm happy to send this to you before we put this out, to make sure that you're okay. Because I absolutely, I don't know how obsessive, the old Russian way was very obsessive, and the KGB way was very obsessive. And it's starting to be that in England, it's starting to be
Yeah.
that even in Australia, and even possibly here in New Zealand, where they're talking about digital ID. So we never know. But I'm with you. I'm just very brave, and I will say the truth. I think that there are some freedoms I won't give up, because I want to live on my feet, not die on my
Yeah,
knees,
it's a 50-50 system too. It's not like we came out here and just trashed everyone as well, right? Like, they're
No.
human beings and they have their incredible strengths and their gifts, and we outlined that. Like, even with Putin, whom I might disagree with on most things, but I can say that he has incredible willpower and sort of like a zest for life, and he's so calculated and he's so strategic, and he has like such a incredible grasp of like the rational, pragmatic, like this cold blood. Like, to me that's impressive, even though like, okay, like I don't sympathize with this cause or whatever, but it's impressive like that a human being can have that level of determination and so on. And at the end of the day, for most people, it's just like an opinion, right?
Yes.
Yeah, it could be something more than that to myself or yourself, and people who like are more sort of like sensitive to it. But no, I don't feel any sort of like pushback from that. But I would if I some of the other things like that you can intuit. Yeah, I would feel that, because they're very strong opinions, right? They're very
Yeah.
strong, like, oh, like pieces of information. And I'm not gonna go out there and like, because there's still like this 0 point something percent chance, or like, let's say even like a 5% chance that I'm awfully wrong about it, right?
Mm.
um so the very strong opinions I'm going to keep to myself and to friends, right?
Mm.
Inner circle. Yeah.
That's brilliant. And
Yeah.
can people, that was the other question, can people contact you on X under Jack of Faces and get more in-depth readings for themselves or their loved ones? Is
Oh, of
that something you
course.
do? And
Yeah, of course.
there's a payment for that? What is there a price? Will you just sort that out with people when they contact you? I take it.
You can go on my Twitter page or my X page at Jack of Faces, and there's a link in my bio. You click that link, and there's a few options, and you
Yes.
can pick whatever suits you, and we can do like a reading. Like, obviously when it's one-to-one, like it's easier to sort of like tell people stuff to their face. When it's more of a public setting, you want to stick to more like generalist thoughts and general ideas, right?
Yes.
Because it's a very it carries a sort of like, it's a very gray zone art, right? It carries like a certain judgment, and like you don't want to go out there and like completely like trash someone, or like just talk really like negatively or badly about them,
Yeah.
even if you believe that to be true, because there is potential for error, firstly, then you have to respect that. There's a possibility of error. There's a possibility of me getting it wrong. You have to respect that. And then there's also sort of like, it's just distasteful. Like, face reading is a very strange art where it can devolve into a personal attack very quickly. And I try to avoid that as much as I can, while also remaining true to the art and relatively honest, right, about like what you see like on a person's face. Yeah, you can see certain like, darknesses and stuff. Like what I said about your friend, like it probably wasn't nice like hearing like when I said like, well, they might have like struggles with sort of like this, you know, bouts of like, the like, mental instability, right? Like it doesn't feel good when you hear that being said about you. And I understand that. And if, if it makes everyone feel better, I also have my, darkness when it comes to physiognomy, right? Like,
Yes,
yeah, I have
all of
terrible
us.
things about me too. I do. All of us do. And I do, more than some others for sure. Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
No, it's really, I love so many things about our conversations. I mean, the geopolitics tonight was fascinating. The directness and the honesty of you, not to mention the deep intelligence of you. It's just a delight to talk to you. But I am going to pick up on that word vulgar. The next three people whose photos I sent you, they were very vulgar people. They were very corrupted people, I felt last year. I felt, in fact, they were paid by the government or maybe by Freemasons. It's very strong here in New Zealand to go after me for 10 months. So I'm not going to do this publicly, but I do, and I won't name them, but I would like to talk about them off air. And so I'm going to say an official goodbye, and then this part of the talk will be kept for between us. And I want just very briefly to see what you see in the faces of these inordinately cruel people who probably were paid to do a job, and it may well have influenced the fact that some of them were in court actually, and their court case hasn't come up here in New Zealand. So who knows what corruption's gone on, but I am fascinated to see what you see in their faces. And it's been a wonderful talk, officially a wonderful talk. Thank you, Jack of
Officially.
Faces.
Likewise, Liz. Thank you for having me on again. It was fun.
It's fun. Yeah.